We at Pink Paradox Design Co. are committed to partnering and uplifting queer-owned, Black-owned, IPOC-owned, or accomplice-owned businesses that are valued aligned in their effort to combat and dismantle inequity in our society. We believe in providing our partners with design strategies that will impact their visibility, success, and overall impact on the common good. Our promise to you is that we will never surrender our values, even when times get tough and things look bleak. We will always stand by you in the fight for a more equitable society. And I want to make sure that the people that I'm serving know that I'm here for them, because the whole point, or not the whole point, but 98% of Pink Paradox is about building intentional community. If I'm not naming them by name, then they're like, oh, this might not be for me. No, this is for you. If you fall under one of these categories, this is for you. I want you to know that you have somewhere to go, especially in light of things like the 404 creative decision, where the Supreme Court allowed businesses to turn away queer people for their identity, a protected class under the 14th Amendment, I might add.
Mhm.
Uh, I want those people to know that, yes, there are businesses out there that are bigoted, that are hateful, and they don't want to serve you. That's not okay, but you have alternative. You have creative spaces that are specifically designed for you. Take advantage of those and build community there, because you can build a stronger community with love than you can with hate.
This is Social Justice Origin Stories. I'm your host, Rolando Tompkins Jones. Social Justice Origin Stories is a storytelling project that highlights personal stories and defining moments that have inspired individuals and organizations to labor for equity and social justice. Through truth-telling, the honest sharing of their experiences, storytellers teach us about themselves, enabling us to learn about ourselves and our world through their stories. By reconnecting with pivotal moments of activation in their lives, they invite us to do the same. At Social Justice Origin Stories, we believe that there's power in storytelling, and lived experience is experience. There's room enough for all of us to do this work. There are many ways to contribute, and our contributions don't need to be the same. We can enter and remain engaged in the work using the gifts that are special to us while supporting others and using theirs. We have the capacity to grow and change for the better when exposed to new information and experiences. We believe in our inherent worth and capabilities, and we possess the power to inspire and create change within ourselves and others. We can transcend the confines of the status quo to imagine and design more equitable and humanizing systems. Today, at Social Justice Origin Stories, I'm very happy to have a friend of mine, Kyahdric Moses, joining us today.
I would describe myself as a design activist. And if there, by any chance, are any graphic designers listening, I actually consider myself a citizen designer, which, if you are not familiar with that term, I suggest you get on that, because I think that is the direction that graphic design and design in general needs to go in, just to be more socially aware and be more intentional about impacting social good. And yes, I'm being a little pretentious by using the nomenclature, but I think that there's power in words and there's power in intention.
Could you say a little bit more about that description and its significance to you, particularly as it relates to the impact of your intersectional identities in the design space as well?
I think for me, understanding my intersectional identities and coming to terms, one, with my sexual orientation, and being a little more enlightened about my racial identity, because I had the same awakening that everybody did in 2020. Although, unlike most corporations, mine didn't vanish as soon as the trend ended. No shade, maybe a little shade.
Maybe a
Uh,
little.
but I think that the more that I understood who I was, the more that I understood that there are things in society that needed to be addressed. And there's a lot. There's a lot of grievance. There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of joy. There's a lot of happiness. And I think that for me, a citizen designer looks to move the needle. I always say that design is not design has never really been just about making things pretty. It's about changing human behaviors and impacting the way that people think about things, the way that different things are perceived. And I think it's our responsibility as citizen designers to make design decisions that will intentionally shift and reframe the narratives that we encounter each day. I don't think that it's enough to just tell the stories that have already been told, because those stories have been told multiple times. I don't think there's enough justification for pushing the status quo. And I don't think that progresses us forward as a society. So I do think that the role of a citizen designer is important. Not saying that I'm necessarily changing the world as one person, but I am being very intentional about how I show up in different spaces and how my role as a citizen designer pushes that forward.
I appreciate you sharing about design and defining yourself as a citizen designer. It reminds me of some words I used to hear through, or would often hear when I was working with folks at the National Equity Project. They would say, history is a series of design decisions. So you look at redlining, segregation, you look at lots of the disparities that we experience, that many people experience and face now. You'll see the design in those decisions. So just saying, like, history is a series of design decisions and systems produce what they're designed to produce. And then they would go on and say, we're all designers. And so designers in terms of putting this reframing and reminding folks that we can play a role in designing systems that are more equitable. So I really appreciate you sharing how you feel and live into and define your role as a designer, citizen designer in particular. There's a quote about Cori Bush, and
Or
the quote says something to the effect of, many of us do not choose to become activists, we are activated. And so there's a longer quote, but that's how it starts. Like, many of us do not choose to become activists, we are activated. What were some things that activated you? I know you mentioned you had that awakening in 2020, and I've talked to people about this too. The shifts that have happened, like, only for you, hey, you saying, hey, it hasn't changed for me the way it has some of these other organizations. And I've talked to folks about that, had the sentiments of, hey, there was a period where folks were saying we need to read all the books, we need to do better. And now it's like we need to ban the books, we need to stop talking about this history. And so this recognition that we not all of us choose activism, but we're activated. I'm wondering if there are some things you can share around what activated you.
I feel like I have a few chapters of awakening. Like they
Okay.
they happen very. Oh, I think the first was 2016, or I shouldn't say 2016. I think it was like 20 when the actual primaries for the presidential race were happening. A few people might not remember this, because who remembers where debates and things happen? My alma mater, the place that I am currently an adjunct professor for, they hosted the DNC. So I got to see Bernie Sanders, I got to see Hillary Clinton, and I forgot the third. Again, no intentional shade. For me, listening to Bernie Sanders, very radical, very self described democratic socialist, started thinking a little bit more about other people and the impacts that our decisions have on other people, and that we don't necessarily exist in a vacuum, and that the policies and things that we push and the narratives that we push need to be inclusive of other people. So I started getting a little more intentional about getting involved in the politics. When 2016 hit and the election was over, oh, I don't think I have stopped watching the news that day.
Okay.
I I fear the idea of being undereducated, especially when it comes to our safety, our social well-being, our cultural well-being, and mix that in with the other kind of moments of awakening that I had. Um, I understood that one of the things that I have to do is to continue to push other people to be a little more empathetic in the way that they navigate different spaces. So when I go into classrooms, for instance, because I mentioned that I am an adjunct professor, which is another part of this awakening,
Okay.
I've mantled the ideas that surround design, because like everything else, it's very ethnocentric, it's very white centered. And even the ways that we talk about design are very white centered. And I want to be intentional about, and I have tried to be intentional about getting my students to think outside of the normative mindset. How do we dismantle? How do we recalibrate these stories that have been told? How do we give different perspectives? How do we make sure that we're tapping on those experts and not just considering them as the target audience, but really experts in their lived experience? And how do we speak to that? The thing that activated me as a citizen designer has to be my involvement in politics, my attention to politics. Um, Many people have this idea, but if you don't watch the news like daily, um, you have this idea that the world around us is toxic. But when you're watching the news and when you're paying attention to politics, it is extremely toxic. And seeing that toxicity, seeing the selfishness that some of our politicians are exuding, but then seeing those politicians like Cory Bush, like AOC, like Jamal Bowman, you get a little, I think you get inspired to do a little more. I can't not mention Bernie Sanders again, because that was the OG for me. I think understanding that there are other people out there, and those people need to be attended to, and their needs need to be attended to. That's how I think about design, and that's the space that awakened that for me. And when I got into grad school, I started really solidifying what my values are, not just as a designer, but as a person, as an activist.
Could you say a little bit more about what some of those values are? Not exhaustive, but what are some of those values that come to mind? You got the grad school, you started solidifying some of those. Say a little bit more about that.
I've literally solidified them because my capstone project was a manifesto, and the values that I put in there, or they're not necessarily values, they're pillars of how to reimagine design education, but they are also things that I value, like radical empathy, radical storytelling, radical self-love. And that first one to me is the most important. There is, can't remember her credentials, so forgive me, but her name is Dr. Jennifer Nash. She talks about the Black love politics, I believe it's officially called. But it's this idea that intersectionality is overused and cheapened by the way that it's overused. And really, we need to get to a space where we are loving who we are radically. We need to really lean into who we are, understand what makes us, and then understand that our individual identities are not the same as other people. Even if we share different identities, different people's experiences inform who they are. And the more that you are intentional about loving yourself, the more that you understand that concept of different. And that concept of difference is not necessarily a bad thing. She argues that it helps you to reinforce this idea of empathy. And that for me is really important. So radical self-love is my first value. The radical empathy, I think, comes right afterwards. Radical authorship, I don't think I said that, but the ability to tell your own story. The normative way of thinking and the normative way of being are not necessarily your reality, and that's okay. You can tell the story and live the story however you wish.
So self-love, empathy,
Yeah.
radical authorship. All right. All right.
Take control of your own story, of your own narratives.
And you've translated, or you've translated, and you're translating these values into the development of business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Slowly but surely, yes.
Slowly but
Yep.
surely. Okay. All right. All right. So tell us a little bit about, or talk a little bit about, how would you describe the origin story of your business?
Oh, let's see. So I've always wanted to be my own kind of boss. I know that's a typical thing for most people, but it's extremely typical for designers. I think designers, especially if you've worked in house as long as I have, you get tired of kind of the ins and outs of being an in-house designer, especially if you're in an environment where it's either just you or you're one of two or three. And that has been my reality for a while. And I have a very specific, very intense relationship with design. I don't want to call it a love-hate relationship, but
Okay.
there's a point of contention sometimes with design because you have to juggle the end user, the client, and sometimes that middle person. And those things don't always mix well. So I decided that, or the universe decided that it was time for me to um, sever out the middle person and focus on being that designer that I want to be and to grow at my pace. So Pink Paradox Design Co. is starting as a branding agency. I want to focus on queer owned, Black owned, IPOC. The, we're making we're making acronyms. IPOC owned, accomplice owned businesses that are valued aligned. I want to focus on helping them with their visibility, with establishing their brand identity and reinforcing it. Because a powerful brand is a powerful messenger. And I think if your goal is social good, then you need that kind of support. So I'm really looking forward to being able to partner with those future collaborators once I get this off the ground. There are a lot of moving pieces here. I think the other piece of Pink Paradox, there are three pieces. The first is the branding. The second is community. I think it's important for designers, especially those who have worked in-house, to understand that they're not alone. I've gone to several conferences where designers will talk about their strives. They'll talk about how much they are stressed out because no one at their job understands what they do. If they do, they have a very narrow understanding, and it can be really isolating. So, a part of what I want to do is to build a community to talk about some of those obstacles, give advice on how you might overcome them. And if I don't have those answers, which 8 times out of 10, I do not, invite people who do have those experiences and that advice. A podcast series called the Stray Pixel Podcast will be like a tangential entity, football, Pink Paradox. So that'll be the space where we gather and talk about some of those things and how we might shift people's understanding of design in professional spaces. I'm also going to launch a social media strategy that focuses on educating those who hire designers on what to expect and what to look for rather than giving this blanket, like, we want you to come in and do everything, because that's really exhausting and could lead to burnout. And then the third and final part of Pink Paradox is to focus on my queer identity. I do think that there's a unique intersection about being a queer Black man. There's still a lot of homophobia within the Black community. There's a lot of internal homophobia within those who are queer and Black, but want to be straight presenting because they don't want to face the ire of society. They don't want to be isolated. No one does. And I want to celebrate that. The whole idea behind the name Pink Paradox is that I am a queer man, a queer Black man that society says shouldn't exist. My logo mark is a skull because thinking specifically about the story where my aunt told me I shouldn't wear this hoodie that had skulls all over it to church. And I'm like, I want to be rebellious. Like, I want to exist the way that I want to exist. And
That's
no
right.
one tell me how to show up. And I really want to create apparel and spaces and conversations about being a queer Black man. So that third facet is really going to be me selling some apparel design that is very celebratory and then offer a space for folks to come in and maybe create their own and collaborate on their own things that celebrate Blackness and queerness. I kind of I had this idea before I bought this shirt, but this shirt definitely, it says "Let Brit
Oh,
Firm Opinions." One of my favorite podcasts. I hate to shout out another podcast on the
no,
podcast.
it's okay. It's okay. Cause if you have resources, if you have like things that, that affirm you, that you go to, we want to share that with other folks. So go ahead. Yeah. Yeah.
Word. Pod Save America. If you're not a political junkie like me, you probably have no idea what that is. But I do encourage you to check them out. This particular shirt or their Pride or Else collection goes to helping, I believe, trans youth get the care that they need. So I'm sure they would love if you were to purchase some of those items there on media.com. But their apparel line for the Pride Month definitely reinforced my desire to do the same thing. I'm curious how I might be able to impact queer spaces. But once I get to a certain point, I would want to be able to donate to queer causes or queer businesses, despite what the Supreme Court might say about that.
Mhm.
Uh, I'm interested in that because I think that there's power in uplifting and celebrating uh, those different queer spaces.
I want to say thanks. There are a few things that you shared, I think, that resonate with me, even my rationale behind wanting to do this project. Before I go into what I heard, I'll say one, thank you for making your experiences accessible. So you're describing like you're building this thing right now. You're actively in the act of doing it. And I think there's something really powerful, there's something really special, really important about making our experiences accessible. There's one of those things that foundational things that kind of grounded one of the reasons why I want to do this is because I've even had my own experiences with this too. But sometimes that tendency where we'll see folks who have accomplished things and we're like, oh, wow, that's so great. And we didn't necessarily see the journey to get there. And sometimes we'll look at folks in a way that can cause it to feel like what they've done is so unattainable to us. And really wanting to support folks in recognizing the journey piece and that we can enter and remain in this work using the gifts that are special to us and support others and using their gifts. So there's room enough for everybody to contribute. But definitely wanted to thank you and affirm you in making your experiences accessible because I know there's someone out there right now who may want to start, who may be stuck in this place of it could be decision fatigue, it could be contemplation, but recognizing or hearing from you the ways that you're starting, the ways that you're moving can be something that really inspires folks into action and affirms them too. Hey, I'm at this place right now. I'm building this and it'll grow and progress as I go along. So there's that piece I want to affirm you for. And then also the feeling of community that you're trying to create through your work and supporting folks and feeling less alone. That's also something that is so important. I've talked about this even in my reaching out to you. Oppression thrives in isolation. So there's
Mhm.
something in that loneliness that can cause us to feel like, oh, this is just us, or there's no one I can talk to about this thing. And so I really feel like what you're doing is shedding light on that. And then lastly, at least for now, you talked about your identities and you talked about homophobia that exists still in spaces and internalized oppression as well. And supporting folks and recognizing and hearing and learning about like the ways that we resist that internalized oppression and the ways that we, interrupt and break up that homophobia within the communities as well is important. So just several things that you shared, just wanted to affirm you in doing that and just knowing that there's someone listening who will be deeply touched and validated by what you're sharing here today. Just wanted to affirm you in that.
Thank you.
As we go, like seriously, making those experiences accessible. You mentioned something about sometimes folks may not have somebody to talk to, right? Didn't you say?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hey, appreciate you coming and sharing your journey of building and becoming this business that you're doing.
To that last piece, I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah, go.
Well, I think it's very clear, and I'm okay with admitting this, that I don't know what I'm doing. I have no idea. I
Hmm.
do have familiarity with branding. I do have familiarity with brand strategy. I've never built a business from scratch. I struggle with the idea of selling my stuff to other people, but I didn't know how to design when I started. I didn't know what topic to write for my manifesto when I started that project. I don't even think it was a manifesto to begin with. The one thing that design has taught me is that it's okay to start broad and wide. Nothing is predetermined, and you don't know what it is that you'll build in the end until you start. It doesn't matter how chaotic it feels. It doesn't matter how ambitious it is. The goal is to set something for yourself and to work towards that. It can feel chaotic and unstable. That's fine. That's a part of the process. But eventually, and if your heart is in it, which mine is, you'll get to a point where things will become more structured and become a lot less chaotic and more systematic.
I'm glad you also talked a little bit about the story behind the name Peak Paradox Design Co. and the significance of that. Could you say more about the mission of Pink Paradox Design Co. and what messages you hope to convey through your actions?
So I actually rewrote the mission statement like 2 days ago. I changed
Perfect.
it manifesto statement because I think mission is too corporate for what I'm trying to achieve. But I'll read it verbatim. We at Pink Paradox Design Co. are committed to partnering and uplifting queer owned, Black owned, IPOC owned, or accomplice owned businesses that are valued aligned in their effort to combat and dismantle inequity in our society. We believe in providing our partners with design strategies that will impact their visibility, success, and overall impact on the common good. Our promise to you is that we will never surrender our values, even when times get tough and things look bleak. We will always stand by you in the fight for a more equitable society.
What I really appreciated just now about hearing your manifesto statement is I feel like what's different from most statements that I hear and what you've said, you were talking directly to the people that you're trying to serve. And then also you're naming and talking directly to them, you're naming your commitments to them as well.
Yeah.
So I just even listening to that, that just felt really powerful, really significant to me. Could you say a little bit more about the intention of that when you crafted that? I know you just said, oh yeah, I wrote this again. I rewrote it 2 days ago. And just thinking that's not an accident in the way that you crafted that, right?
Right.
There's some intention
No.
behind that. So talk a little bit about the why behind why you wrote it in that way, because I thought that was pretty powerful. You're talking directly to the people and you're letting them know these are our commitments to you.
So that's design. So it's specifically that way because in design, one of our biggest practices, and I think this is why design thinking is very important for all business entities or social entities, whatever. You got to know who you're talking to. You can't shape a message without knowing who your audience is. If you don't have a clear understanding of who you're trying to talk to, then your message will be muddled. I wanted to be very intentional about who it is that I want to serve. And notice how I don't use the word ally because I don't do that. I don't need an ally. I don't need someone cheering me on from the sidelines. I need to active in
That's
this
right. That's right.
change.
That's right.
And I want to make sure that the people that I'm serving know that I'm here for them because the whole point, or not the whole point, but 98% of Pink Paradox is about building intentional community. If I'm not naming them by name, then they're like, oh, this might not be for me. No, this is for you. If you fall under one of these categories, this is for you. I want you to know that you have somewhere to go, especially in light of things like the 404 creative decision where the Supreme Court allowed businesses to turn away queer people for their identity, a protected class under the 14th Amendment, I might add.
Mhm.
Uh, I want those people to know that yes, there are businesses out there that are bigoted, that are hateful, and they don't want to serve you. That's not okay, but you have alternative. You have creative spaces that are specifically designed for you. Take advantage of those and build community there because you can build a stronger community with love than you can with hate.
So I feel like you've gone into it, but the messages that you hope to convey through your actions,
Yeah.
I feel like you laid that out
fight this fight.
How do you ensure that Pink Paradox will remain aligned with its core values and commitments?
I'm about to pull an old folk line out of my back pocket. I'm
Okay.
not too big for my britches. I'm not. I've seen how money corrupts people, and I never want to get to that space. So, yes, money is a priority. Obviously, for a business, I want to make money, bills. I gotta eat. I'm a little materialistic. I'm naming all those things, but I never want to get to a point where money is so much of my focus that it takes me away from what my actual goal is. And I don't think it ever will, because no amount of money will ever get me to sacrifice my values, because my values are what I built this this idea on. And the minute they're gone, the business doesn't exist. So if I want to stay in business, these values are staying with me. That's the first thing. I think the second thing, I'm in the middle of reading this really amazing book by this design consultant named Emily Cohen. And it's basically just a book on how to run a creative business. And one of the things she talks about is staying true to yourself, staying true to your business, and staying true to the people that you made a commitment to, your audience, and approaching all of those aspects with love. Um, because without that, your business will fail. And I don't think that that just applies to the design space. I think that applies for businesses widely. But for me, understanding that my values are what undergird and what serve as the strong foundation for this business, understanding the importance and not forgetting that is how I plan on moving and maintaining my values. Those ain't going nowhere.
Those ain't going nowhere.
Ain't going
Nowhere.
nowhere.
Nowhere. All right. All right. So, are there people, things, experiences that have inspired you along this journey?
Yeah, that's a long list, but I'll keep it relatively short. There are two that come to mind. If I were to share this podcast with any of my students that have taken my classes before, they know these names because I've hammered them into their head. The first is an architect named Liz Ogbu. She is a Black architectural designer, and she is actually where I learned the phrase citizen designer and expert citizen. This idea that there should be a relationship between the designer and the people that they're serving, and not just understanding the world from an outsider's perspective, but really getting involved with the people that you're talking to. As I've told my students last semester when I was teaching corporate identity, uh, get out in these streets. Get out in these streets and connect with people. You're designing for them, so you need to understand the world from their perspective. And Liz Ogbu has really shaped how I see that relationship between designer and end user, expert. So if I say expert, that's what I mean, the person who I'm designing for. And then the second is a disability is design activist named Josh Halstead. He is he is disabled, but he is also a designer. I believe that I don't actually remember the medical term off the top of my head, but does not have full mobility of his arms. So as you can imagine, design might be a little tough, but that's only from a normative perspective. It was his story and his explaining the world through his eyes and how the world is not designed for people like him that really made me tap into empathy as a design resource. Because we think about design and we think about the world around us from a normative perspective. But design really needs to approach solution building from a non-normative perspective. That's how we come up with more innovative design. That's how we design a more equitable world. And I actually, what's funny, and this is digressing, and I apologize, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Go for it.
In one of my classes, the design thinking class, and I changed the language at the last minute. The students were supposed to come up with design ideas for a new innovation. That was always the project, but the stipulation that they had this time is that they had to consider how someone who is physically disabled, how they might interact with the thing that they've created. And when I tell you, they came up with some amazing design intervention. And I always think if you design for those on the margin, that you make a more equitable design that anybody can use. No design is going to be made for everybody. I don't want to make like universal design as a thing, but there is a thing is more intentional and equitable design practice.
So you named a couple of folks. If somehow, some way they would come across this podcast and they could hear you, what are some things that you might say to them as you shared it and the way you described them and the impact that they had and continue to have on you? It just made me think about if folks are able to receive the messages from us, just to share that with them. So if there was an opportunity or some happenstance kind of way they came across this, what would you say?
The first thing if this were in person, I would ask for is a selfie because I I need to bookmark that moment. But obviously the initial thing is thank you for shifting how I understand or how I think about design. Because I think that for me, I knew that I wanted to do something for social good using design. My thesis project for undergrad was about helping people cope with depression. And that to me was a project that was really satisfactory. Not that it was amazing, but I got to do something that felt like it had the potential for making change. But it wasn't until I ran across the work of Liz Ogbu, and it wasn't until I discovered Josh Halstead that I really understood that design has the potential to do more. It's not just about making pretty things. It is about making an impact, and citizen designers and design activists, or want to call ourselves, have an important role to play. And it was because of them that I was able to fully realize what role design has, and how we can use it as a tool to shift how we think about society and how people behave, and how they perceive the world and how they perceive other people in the world. We have this idea of empathy and design as a resource, but it's so shallow. It's about, well, a user loved this website. What makes it easy for a specific user to use this website or this tool that we're designing or this app? But that to me is only level one of the role that empathy plays. Because of them, that I discovered level 2 and 3. 2 being really thinking outside of yourself and thinking about the extreme users. And then level 3 is not just talking about them in theory, not just saying, what would a person do if they were like actually connecting with them and saying, hey, what do you think of this thing? This usable for you? How does this impact you? Or how does this shift your perspective on how you think society might perceive you as a person? Because those things can be, as someone who is plus size, like I understand what it's like to be in a world that doesn't really think about your existence and how anomalous it makes you feel. A world that's not designed for you. Obviously, it's not to the extreme as someone who is differently abled, but it is an experience that can be really isolating. And I don't want to perpetuate that. And I'm glad that they showed me the light on how to start thinking about making design more accessible, more intentional, and more empathetic.
You went into a little bit more detail about how you described expert in the world of design and how you approach that in your work. What you said addresses some really important equity issues. Could you just say more about what you mean when you say expert when it comes to design?
I'm crediting again Liz Ogbu on that, although I'm sure she might have pulled that from a different design resource. A little bit of source amnesia there, but I think it's good to start off with a little bit of context and then go into that. But the context is I have a very love-hate contentious relationship with academia. Obviously, I work in that space. Obviously, I worked full-time in that space. But academia can be a little bit of an expert hog. I think that there's something to be said about doing the hard work and getting your degree and understanding the subject matters that you are tasked with understanding. But that also is not a substitute for lived experience. Those people who are on the ground living their lives are experts in their life. They understand the realities of what's going on. So let's say we're talking about racism. Sure, there are academic spaces where dialogues about racism happen. I think that those are important, and I think the expertise behind that is important. But it's also important to recognize that there are people behind those theories, and those people are also experts on the things that they face. And I think it's important to recognize a lived experience as a form of expertise, because that diversity of knowledge helps to shape a more informed perspective on whatever the subject matter is. But then two, it allows you, and I'm speaking from a designer's perspective, but it allows a more robust way to approach design, because you're not just focusing on what books, articles, and other designers are saying. You're really focused on what the people that you're serving, you're focusing on their expertise as well. So sure, you might have some articles that say, we need to design this way for this group of people. But if the people that are in direct contact with your final design outcome don't see it the same way that the quote unquote academic experts do, then you've lost the plot. It doesn't matter what the article said. It doesn't matter what the dissertation said. It doesn't matter what the magazine said.
That's right.
You're not speaking to the people for whom you are actually designing.
And if you're not speaking to the people for whom you're actually designing, who is it for at that point?
Because you're not making it
What are we doing?
The academics, right? You're making it for the people who are actually on the ground. That's the way that we actually progress change. That's the way that we impact social good, is by fully understanding the spaces that those experts inhabit.
Finish the statement. Real social justice is possible when?
When people are passionate about understanding other people. I don't think that you can't have an apathetic form of justice. It can't just be, this is the way that I see the world, and this is the way that it has to be. It can't just be this, like I said, the trendy thing that businesses did in 2020. It can't be something that you see as a trend, and it can't be something that you think is going to pass immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's been decades, centuries of injustice. And we can't undo all of that in an instant. And we can't undo it individually. But you have to have the drive, you have to have the passion to at least try. There are going to be people that make an impact. And I firmly believe that even if the impact is small, Being Paradox is going to help me to do that very thing, because I'm passionate about it, because I'm passionate about change. I'm passionate about the social good. And yes, it can get exhausting. And yes, there have been moments where I'm like, I don't feel like fighting today. I'm tired. But I rest and I come back because that passion hasn't left me. So social justice happens when you have that fire in your belly.
My approach to social justice is shaped by.
Now it is shaped by an understanding of mental wellness. I think that, and I really built this after reading Jennifer Nash and after listening to some of her conversations about Black feminist love politics. I really think I'm giving that the wrong title, but that's the one I remember.
Okay.
Just this idea that, like I said before, self-love. But what that also made me realize is that this world is full of hate. This society is, especially in 2024, there's a lot of hate going around. There's a lot of bigotry. Um, and as a queer Black man, you are facing it from a homophobic angle and from a racist angle. And it can be really tiresome to operate in that space. And it can be really exhausting enumerating all of the oppression that you're facing. But if you're focused on your mental health, your mental wellness, and understand that others need the space to do the same, then you can understand that the fight for social justice is not just one that's about combating bigotry, combating oppression, but it's also a battle to uplift and support one another. And I think that in the journeys of being a social activist, people tend to only focus on the fight that need to happen. And that's good. I don't want to downplay that. It's important to point out the problems that we face in society, but it's also important, and I would argue more important, to support and uplift the people who are being oppressed, because we don't need to perpetually live in that hate. We see it all the time. We feel it all the time. And if that's the only source of energy that we're getting from even the people that are supporting us, that is exhausting. And that's not good for the mental wellness, and it's not good for the long-term fight against inequity.
So for folks in the future, many years from now, who might come across this, or what would you want them to know when it comes to this work and this life that you're living? Because it's life too, right?
Learn how to balance between um, the things that bring you joy, that bring support and love and light, with the fight that need to be fought. Because the way things are going right now, I don't imagine the fight is going to be ending anytime soon. I think future generations will still be fighting for social justice and equity. Um, and it's not ideal. And I don't want to undercut that we have made a lot of progress in recent years, and that progress will be met with what feels like a turning back of the clock. But if you get to that point where it feels like the clock is turning back, you've done good work. Continue to do that work. Don't stop because you have those setbacks. Don't stop because in our case, you have some rogue Supreme Court that's just going off vibes, or politicians that find it better to entertain than to actually govern. I don't know that's something that's going to be unique to 2024, and I don't think that it's something that's going to end now. So future generations need to be able to bear with that. And the other big thing, and this is not design oriented, political, because I am very political minded. You don't necessarily have to run for office, but understand how the government works. We have a tendency to focus on things that don't actually matter or don't matter as much, and then we neglect the things that need our attention. Make sure you have a full, robust understanding of how civics affects your life, because even if it's boring to you, it's going to impact you. There's no way around that.
No way around it.
Nope. Understand how the world works around you, understand how those things impact your daily life, and navigate your life with that. Hopefully, you don't have to be as toxically involved in politics as I see, but don't walk around in ignorance, because ignorance is one of the biggest poison pills to social activism.
You mentioned before that social good does not always need to be combative. Could you say more about that?
Just that there there is that hidden part of social good that's about connection, that's about community. In 2020, there was a lot of focus on Black pain, Black suffering, Black heartache, and those things are real. But it also felt like it minimized what the Black experience is. We are not we are not just oppressed. We are resilient. Our people have gone through a lot. Much like our ancestors, we've had to build communities with one another to survive. And it takes resilience, it takes an innovative mindset to be able to do something like that, especially under the duress of slavery. Those things have always, or at least in the American context, have been a reality of the Black experience. But we did not survive and thrive because of our oppression. We did it in spite of it. And it's important for us in the social justice space, no matter what community we're serving, to understand that there are parts of people's lived experiences that need to be uplifted and celebrated. And in terms of design, this is where Josh Halstead had one of the biggest impacts on me in this book that he contributed to called Extra Bold.
I
Dude,
feel
let me
like
get
I've
off.
seen you. I feel like I've seen you hold it up, or I know at least in one of the videos I saw with you explaining a little bit about Pink Paradox design. I feel like it was like on the shelf or something.
Oh yeah, no, it's on
Yeah,
my.
it was up there.
It's called Extra Bold, a feminist, inclusive, anti-racist, non-binary field guide for graphic designers.
All
It's
right.
a very long title,
All right.
but he is one of the contributors. But he basically wrote about what medical society considers a normative body, and that those who are physically disabled specifically are treated as anomalies or tangent to that normative experience rather than an experience in their own right. And I think that for me reshaped how I think about social justice, because he argues that a disability is not a bad thing. It shouldn't necessarily be treated as an other. It should be treated as a lived experience as it is. And that resonated with me. Yes, like I said, Black people have been through a lot. We got through that because of our resilience, our love, our empathy, our connection, our community. We never let those things go. Because even if you look at some Black people in the roughest situations, you can always find that we are able to thrive because we have one another. And things like that need to be uplifted in social justice spaces.
Tell those
Only,
stories too.
if we're only seeing the bad, then we don't get the full story.
Why is telling our origin stories important?
Because I think that there are people who might have similar experiences. Again, not the exact same, but there might be people who have gone through similar things who might feel like they are alone in their thinking. They might feel like they are alone in their development, and they feel like they, as an individual person, might not have what it takes to make change, because the world is huge. And not gonna lie, like, we tend to be very ambitious in this space. We want to change the entire world and dismantle structures and then restructure them, and we can't do that by ourselves. It, it's not possible. But I think that hearing, if a person listens to this or any stories that about that social justice origin story, then they can point to that kind of relatable experience and say, hey, I felt that too, or I've been through something similar. Maybe I can do something. Maybe it's not about changing the entire world. Maybe it's just about me changing this pocket of the world that I exist in. When you get more people who feel empowered by that kind of connection, by that kind of empathy and community, um, the greater the chances are that we will build a more equitable society. So I think it's really important for people to understand where people came from and what sparked their interest in social justice.
Thank you. Thank you.
I am going to do a plug.
Okay, go for it. Go for it.
I will be soon putting my manifesto for sale, and it's called House of Graphics, a loving manifesto for reimagining design education. If you are a designer and an educator, it's going to make you mad, especially if you're not used to DEI as a topic. You are interested, as someone who just works in DEI or social justice or equity initiatives, things like that, if you're interested in understanding my thought process behind design education, I think it'll be really helpful, because it's not just a philosophy that I think applies to design. I think it applies widely to different career fields. Because not only does it talk about how to shift mindsets, but it also talks about empathy as a tool, as a good design resource, love as a good design resource, and knowledge, what it means to actually hold knowledge and be an expert. It's a lot more coherent than I tend to be in person. I definitely would recommend that once that's out in the world, if you're interested in purchasing it, give it a purchase. Again, it's called House of Graphics, a loving manifesto for reimagining design education.
Are there any other places that we might be able to find Pink Paradox Design?
Right now, there is a website,
Okay.
but it's under construction.
Okay.
Pink Paradox, my goal is to, by September, have things up and running. I will be selling apparel. I will be running a podcast series. And I will be building an Instagram page that will be targeted towards the folks hiring designers, so we can get a little bit of education on what to do and what not to do when you're working with or looking for designers.
Thank you. Thank you for supporting me, supporting the project. Thank you for coming on and sharing about the dream that you're building as well. I just appreciate you. I believe you are the person you envision in the work that you want to do. You're consistent and you have a commitment to making sure that, like you were saying earlier, hey, if I'm steering off this path, then this ain't what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm not doing this anymore. The values leave me, then this isn't it. And there's something really important to be said about that consistency, about your commitment and making your experiences accessible. Like I said, there's some folks out here who what you're sharing, what you shared today is really going to resonate. And sometimes even beyond what we might, imagine or think in the moment. So thank you. Thank you for being you. Thank you for sharing your origin story with us. And hey, maybe down the line, we'll do an update or something, see how things are going, like a check-in. But thank you so much. Just incredible.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me. I'm very honored to be one of the first guests on here.
Yeah.
On what's about to be a podcast that's about to blow up. I'm here for it.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts and subscribe to Social Justice Origin Stories there or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also watch video episodes on YouTube at Social Justice Origin Stories, and I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe there as well. Video episodes are also available on the project website, socialjusticeoriginstories.com. Follow the project on Instagram at Social Justice Origin Stories. I'd love to hear about how you're engaging with the stories. Share your thoughts at socialjusticeoriginstories.com/contact or by emailing stories@socialjusticeoriginstories.com. To support the work of Social Justice Origin Stories, consider becoming a monthly patron. Your contributions will help keep this research going and support its mission. Visit patreon.com/socialjusticeoriginstories to learn more and to make a contribution. Again, that's patreon.com/Social Justice Origin Stories. You can start or stop anytime. Social Justice Origin Stories is edited, hosted, and produced by me, Rolando Tompkins Jones. Many thanks to our storyteller this week and the many storytellers who have contributed to this project. And thank you for joining me this week. Take care.